So, 2020 sucked. Wow, this is an old script. With the world events that affected all of us, I found more and more time on my idle hands. With this, I found myself motivated to complete my childhood goal of completing Pokémon Emerald version 100%. This, however, is not an easy task, as many people are aware. A significant Pokémon Ho-Oh was only released through events, and without editing my save file to hunt for it and its silver counterpart, it led me to replay the 2 games I never finished as a kid. As a kid, I was not good at games and I wasn't a critical thinker. I'm still not today, but my lack of awareness and problem-solving skills as a 5 to 7-year-old made Pokemon a very difficult game for me. I couldn't even beat the Elite Four originally, and would need my cousin to beat it for me because my only strategy would only ever be throwing my Pokemon at it, resorting to legendaries without any EVs, and being too impatient to grind or teach my Pokemon debuffing moves. Pokemon was more about the aesthetic of the world and characters, and I just never fully grasped that enjoyment of the battle system. Not to mention my cousin would disconnect on Pokemon Crater every time I was about to win, so I couldn't put together strategies, but that's another topic for another day. The idea I'm attempting to get across here is I have sour memories of Pokemon games, specifically Pokémon Colosseum. I'd get really bored with it, misunderstand its mechanics, and not finish playing it because even when I fought tooth and nail to get to the final boss, the challenge was just too steep. As an aside, YouTube analytics tell me only 10% of the people who watch my videos are subscribed, so subscribe if you haven't, as I'll be working on more videos in the future, and you can fully unsubscribe later if you feel it necessary. So, let's back up the timeline a few years. The year is 2000 and Pokemon Crystal has released. Game Freak has cemented Pokemon as sustainable, and Nintendo is excited to see where they can take the series next. Luckily for them, they have a new toy to play with, as the Game Boy Advance's release is just a year off, right on the horizon. As game developers do, they start working on their next installment. Game Freak finally had the games they wanted to create out, and now is the time that they're going to refine it. This leads to a lot of good changes, such as IVs and EVs being refined, better sprites, natures, and double battles, which will become Pokemon's competitive battle format in the future. Regrettably, with focusing on new mechanics, they just couldn't fit all the Pokemon into Ruby and Sapphire. Whether that was an intentional anti-consumer decision or just a decision made by developer crunch is beyond me. Regardless, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire released to controversy as returning fans as Pokemon were now stuck on their Game Boy cartridges, and their newest games are loaded with only new Pokemon until hours in, making fans upset, disheartened, and alienated. But they had a plan. Masuda was assisting Genius Sonority on a console Pokemon game which was different but showed promise, Pokémon Colosseum. I'm not sure how many Pokemon were added to Emerald, but the exclusive Pokemon to this game were the Johto starters and Ho-Oh when it first released. In addition to this, Game Freak was already planning for Fire Red and Leaf Green, which will bring most missing Pokemon back anyway besides these. This lends to the argument that this could have been a move to sell more Pokemon games by locking few Pokemon behind each game for Pokédex completion. The Johto starters would later be distributed as a gift in-game when you completed Emerald's regional decks. Then Ho-Oh would become an event Pokemon for the same reason beyond me. I'm all for extra areas for each legendary, like they did in Sinnoh, but the events weren't at all easy to get in 2003, then if you missed it, you're just out of luck. It's a hard thing to criticize because at the same time, I like the work you had to put in. It feels like a complete Pokédex was a real challenge you have to face. But that's just my mindset right now, when I have all the time in the world to deal with Game Freak's bad decisions. So what is Coliseum, this game that's gonna bring back our old friends? It's Arizona. Manabu Yamada, the president of Genius Sonority, wanted to show a different take on the Pokemon world. He and his team's goal was to show a more adult-feeling view on Pokemon, so he created the character Wes, as an older brother figure with darker clothes and a bit of an attitude. Yamada was sure that the best way to display a more adult world was to make it dry and urban, since adults didn't play outside in the grass, so why would our adult protagonists? Despite having such a seemingly binding setting, it makes use of it to make make every area unique. The oasis city of Fenak, the urban slums of Pyrite Town, the grass hills of Agate, and the volcanic Mount Battle are all different enough to be memorable, and this is where you'll spend your adventure, storming the odd Cypher base here and there. I don't want to say it has a post-apocalyptic feel, but an every man for himself look. One glance at Wes's bike and you can mistake it for a vehicle of a Fallout game. The creativity of the setting falls short, unfortunately, as this means there's no tall grass to encounter Pokemon in, which limits your options. Which brings up the question, without wild grass, how are Pokemon even caught? While I can't say enough good about the setting, the gameplay is extremely solid. That doesn't make sense. I absolutely love the setting, and just as good is the gameplay. Contrary to the traditional Pokemon games, Colosseum has you stealing or snagging shadow Pokemon from trainers. Shadow Pokemon are Pokemon that have had the doors to their hearts closed and will viciously attack trainers, even though it only happens once in the game and more akin to a toddler shoving you. There's only a total of 48 shadow Pokemon in the game, and around a fifth of them are unfortunately placed in the final area of the game, not making for a great member of the team. Although I don't think Pokemon needs a great story, I think at least having one game with a darker story is a fantastic move to try to expand the Pokemon brand. And the limit of Pokemon, although a lot of people see it as a negative, I kind of see it as a positive because it brings to light other Pokemon that people don't use a lot. Since a common complaint about Pokemon games are they're too easy, but people are always choosing between the same like 10 super strong Pokemon in their playthroughs. Like, you'll never use Stantler in a normal playthrough, but in Colosseum it's probably the best normal type. Anyway, I've praised this game a lot, but it has its faults. My first complaint is that the purification of shadow Pokemon take way too long. So to purify a shadow Pokemon, you need to travel to Agate Village, where you can interact with the Celebi Shrine. But to activate it, the Pokemon's heart gauge has to be completely empty, which can be achieved in a few ways: walking, sending them out in battle, and massaging them. So the effectiveness of this is determined by the nature of the Pokemon, which is not shown until you've already taken away a good chunk of its heart gauge. Even the best setup for each Pokemon drains the meter slowly, giving you two real options: attempting to purify them throughout your playthrough, and having underleveled Pokemon for hard boss fights. Alternatively, you can use the same team all the way through, still needing to grind for the huge level jump in the final 2 fights of the game, and having to grind for hours after the game is complete. There are ways around this. The method I used as a kid was plugging in the controller in a way that it drifts and traps my character into a walk cycle. Another method is you can also duplicate nuggets in Pokemon Emerald and trade them to Colosseum, buy a bunch of vivid senses and spam them, but this can still take up to 20 cents each, with very slow dialogue scrolling and having to listen to the Pokemon's cry, and possibly overusing sense because it doesn't notify you when the gauge is empty, meaning that if you don't use either exploit, you'll have to grind for money in Colosseums for hours just to buy the most expensive cologne, only to then waste some and spending half an hour just draining the heart gauges of a single party of shadow Pokemon. Next complaint, capturing shadow Pokemon during trainer battles, right? So if you knock it out and the trainer disappears, can you get it again? Yes, surprisingly, but in the post game. At first I thought it would be gone forever, but after looking into it, it's not the case, but might as well be for anyone you actively want to use on your team. The Pokemon of Cypher members will appear in the Snag'em hideout, which is only accessible after you complete the game. So if you want to use Vibrava, one of the only 2 dragon types in the game, you need to make sure you know Vibrava is coming up and save, because if you missed it, it's locked out of your entire playthrough until the post game, where you don't need a Vibrava anymore. Since the post game barely has any battles you can raise another Pokemon with, especially since they're at the same level as you first encountered them at. Speaking of saving, why is it only accessible on PCs? If you're in Cypher's base or Realgam Tower or any other dungeon, you have to trek all the way back at fixed walking speeds, and hopefully the nearest PC has a healing machine next to it, or you have to cycle your Pokemon in the PC to heal them, and at that point there's no reason to not have a healing machine at each PC, since you can cycle them anyway and heal them. Sword and Shield implemented the PC feature so much better, as it can be accessed anywhere but doesn't heal your Pokemon. This makes Pokemon centers still make sense. Also, it can be worth noting that everything I've complained about is fixed in the sequel, so Genius Sonority did a really good job at listening to their fans. Now, for the most unfortunate part. While every person who has played Colosseum thinks modern Pokemon could take a lot of things away from it, Masuda just doesn't like the series at all. During a 2016 interview, he was asked whether or not it was possible that maybe, just maybe, we could see the series return, and he just straight up laughed. It's common knowledge that when asked about new stadium games, he said there wouldn't be a point because Pokemon is already in 3D now, but the 2016 interviewer specifically asked about Colosseum, so I don't have any faith in a continuation. Also, considering that Pokemon is much more friendly nowadays, I don't believe Game Freak would allow such a dark setting associated with their IP. I still have hope for potential remakes though, as Pokemon Mystery Dungeon DX has been released as a faithful remake with new features and a fun art style, and Genius Sonority is still kicking, focused on their RPG The Denpa Men, as well as working on Pokemon spin-offs like Battle Rose Shuffle and, I guess, Cafe Mix. I firmly believe that after the success of Mystery Dungeon DX, Genius would not be opposed to releasing Colosseum games, at the very least, let alone remaking them. Regardless of Masuda's blind hate for the Colosseum games, I still hope that a remake can be produced for these games. Out of all the spin-off games, these are the ones that need it the most, because Colosseum is not just a fun self-contained experience, but it's also the first time in Pokemon's history that a game can be completed without needing other games. Every other spin-off game besides the GameCube ones can be played on the Wii U or the 3DS, which are both cheap and super accessible consoles. Pokemon Colosseum is a piece of gaming history that deserves to be preserved on future handhelds or consoles, despite Nintendo's hesitance to release their GameCube library. This could be a topic for another video, but currently the GameCube is a 20-year-old piece of disc-based hardware. Considering discs rot and consoles die, it's a shame to see that most of its library is locked away behind such old hardware that's not even supported by modern-day TVs. Luckily, people who care have been developing hardware to pick up the slack where Nintendo won't, with the GameCube HD and the GC Loader mods to keep these games and systems alive. But before this becomes a Nintendo analysis, I'll give my final thoughts. Pokemon Colosseum is some of the best work that has come from this franchise, and it's 1,000,000,000% worth giving a try by whatever means is financially realistic.